Spoilers for Deltarune chapters 1 to 4 in the weird route. It's not mandatory playing to watch, but it's best if you have. Pure darkness is what is described as the darkness that powers Castletown. It is pretty clear throughout the game that it is the reason why we can recruit Darkners to Castletown, the reason they can come back to life. Rousey first makes reference to pure darkness in chapter 2, when Lancer turns to stone. Pure darkness contrasts with the tension that is evoked from other darknesses. There are no surprise combat encounters, no dangers lurking around, and very few secrets to discover. The geometry of the Castletown is simple, you can leave whenever you want, and you can see your favorite villains in their rooms. It also contrasts the lore of other darknesses. Other darknesses' darkners are based on the will of the person who makes them. The Roaring Knight's first fountain in the church summons specific darkners, while Susie's fountain summons different darkners. Other darknesses don't revitalize all darkners like pure darkness does, presumably because wills differ between people. In the interest of speculation, I'll say that it seems that the Castletown's Dark Fountain of pure darkness was made with either impossibly large-scale will or no discernible will at all. Also, we can go back to Castletown at the end of Chapter 4 for Mike's room and get access to the cafe to see all of the recruited Chapter 4 Darkners, showing that the Pure Darkness's revival capabilities do apply to those Darkners, in case we weren't confident that that was true. For some reason, though, the game makes a point of saying that this doesn't apply to Gerson. Rousey says in Chapter 4 that Darkners patterned after the memory of a loved one tend to only appear in very specific darknesses. Wait, what? Why? How do you know that Gerson is a loved one at all? Does that mean you know the Knight? And if you don't know the Knight's identity and are just somehow assuming that Gerson is a loved one even though you have no proof, is that the only way that some Lightner can come back to life? Are you
Well, glad I'm not that guy.
I take him as honest in this scene about the nature of pure darkness. That really, even if they brought Gerson's Lightworld form into Castletown, he wouldn't form either. That Lightner-type darkness really do only appear when made in the right darkness. The Roaring Knight could make that darkness, Susie couldn't. So pure darkness only works for anything that isn't living. That's weird, right? It feels like Lightner darkness are excluded from revival, as if they somehow require more than determination and imagination. They require knowledge? Do dark fountains hold some specific barriers up for revival for some reason? Do dark fountains hold a moral conscience? What makes a specific darkness able to bring a Lightner back to life? Or maybe a better question, what makes a Lightner able to bring a Lightner to life? Well, we know that Rousey says that darknesses reflect the will of the Lightner who creates them. If I had to guess without taking inspiration from other people, I would say that you have to have unshakable faith that someone will be revived to be able to bring them to life. Your faith has to be absolute in their character and their ability to be revived. But I don't think that's all there is to this, and I am borrowing from other people when I say this. A lot of Deltarune theorists in the fandom think that, for one, Des is the Knight, due to the overwhelming implication, and that, two, she must have known Gerson well enough in real life to bring him back. This is a typical way that fantasy stories can handle very magical ideas. They put them into a reasonable logical context in a way that implies that an acceptance of certain morals should occur. You can't make up new exploits for someone that you love without being able to recount the exploits that they actually went on. You need to know the person's personality as they lived to revive them in your Dark Fountain, whether intentionally or not. I really like that theory. I think it holds meaning. Therefore, I think that there's somewhat of a combination of the two when we really get down to what makes a Lightner able to revive another Lightner. I think that Des, the Knight, probably did know Gerson and knew his character. This gave Des the confidence needed for her to bring Gerson back. Of course, this also means that Susie wouldn't be able to bring Gerson back to life because she didn't know him in real life. Along with this, I think that her will was shattered because she saw that he was dead and was shaken in her faith to be able to bring him to life. She didn't outwardly express it because of her character, but she knew deep down that there was something wrong with this. Of course, I would like to say that the theory still makes sense even if the common fandom interpretation of things is wrong, and bringing a Lightner back to life is all about will and determination and nothing else. Des being able to bring Gerson back because she had full confidence that she could makes sense, and Susie not having the will to bring him back because of moral quandary also makes sense. I don't have the confidence to say that knowledge about a person's character isn't important though. There is something about knowing someone in real life that makes sense for being able to create them in a fictional world, a dark fountain. My point is over there, but if you want to know more, it lines up with the timeline I have in my head of her knowing Gerson before she went down into the shelter with Chris and talking to the big man.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do want to go somewhere before we get there.
Now, huge aside, I looked at where the word pure is used in Deltarune to see if there was anything mentioned, and only 2 times did it matter. The first I'll mention is the use of the word pure in a world basked in purest light, in the prophecy blurbs of chapter 4. The prophecy is written in poetic writing. I have an interpretation, I'll flash it on screen. This interpretation is not important. I followed that train of thought and it didn't lead me anywhere. The other important time the word pure is referenced is in relation to the mysterious item, the pure crystal. This item has no canon definition or identity as of right now, but it is an item that is crafted with the weird route item, the thorn ring, to create the mysterious item, the twisted sword. However, those items are important to the weird route in ways that I don't think have any relation to the word pure, especially the nature of pure darkness. If I had to speculate, the pure crystal probably has something to do with the shadow crystals we can get in the game, and the purity of it will likely have something to do with something Sham knows about it, or something Melius can do for us with the shadow crystals. It would require far too much speculation about the nature of an item we literally have never seen before for this to be fair. The word pure here probably has something to do with pure darkness, but we straight up don't know it, and for this item specifically, I'll just leave it at that. Alright, we learned something from that, I think, maybe. Maybe there is a relation between pure darkness and a pure crystal, and maybe a relation to the role of the sun within human society. Pure darkness, am I right? I totally lost the plot. Where the hell were we? Oh right, the theories I promised. For context, I placed this theory in a spot that has not been discussed in canon. Some incident which may or may not be located at the shelter involving Des. This is going to have to do with Des's disappearance. I also want to involve Chris in her disappearance because I think it is important for this theory specifically. Say, since Chris and Des were close, maybe they went on a solo adventure down to the shelter together. Des getting the shelter codes somehow. She lockpicks Carol's door or something, or finds them in Gerson's office. And then they go into the shelter, turn on their flashlights, close the door behind them so no one knows they're there, and wander around until they find something cool inside. Eventually, they find what appears to be a monster working on a little machine with a monitor on it. The monitor holds on it code, written in symbols they can't read, hands and faces, flags and bombs. The monster, rambling to himself, eventually notices the two waving their flashlights around. Des and Chris talk to him, but he speaks in a language they don't understand, his face still turned away from them. Off-putting, but whatever, Des thinks. She loses interest in waiting for him, and presses a button to turn the machine on, not knowing what it would do. And bam! A dark fountain opens. Dun dun dun, shock and horror. This is the premise of a theory I call machine theory. It's speculative, but I think it has a solid level of credence. Before we get into this, someone told me I should explain Entry 17, so I will, quickly. Entry 17 is commonly considered to be an entry written in Undertale by Gaster. It's written in wringed, which is a font largely consisting of hands and other symbols, linking to what the river person says, "Beware the man who speaks in hands." Entry 17 is both audio and sort of visual because of wingdings, which doesn't usually happen in Undertale. Entries in the true lab, where Alphys speaks, are mostly just Alphys' voice and writing. Only the video entries have any level of audio in the background, which is just music. Not this. It has unique background audio that isn't music, like messed up garbage noise, the noise in Deltarune named smile.ogg, which plays when Chris uses the phone in the dark world. It also discusses a phenomenon that sounds like a dark fountain. To bring this back around to the shelter is heavily linked to Gaster because of how the noise playing near the shelter is so similar to Entry 17. Take a listen. And the fact that the Gaster-related knight goes inside of it in Chapter 3. You might be wondering how I could possibly guess that the knight is related to Gaster. If you are, please watch this video. I'm pretty sure it'll explain the connections between Gaster and the knight. First, let's talk about the machine. The machine is, I think, a decent explanation for pure darkness. We know that darkness changes depending on the person making it. Susie's isn't pure, and the Roaring Knight isn't pure. Well, I think at least. I don't recall any statues in Chapter 4's third sanctuary, meaning it might have been a pure fountain, but probably not. We just have no proof. If darkness changes between lighteners, then if a machine made a fountain, it could be quality controlled in a way that a lightener might not be able to do. Maybe a machine could create pure darkness through this quality control. Alternatively, a machine has no personhood. It could just straight up make pure darkness by default. In a machine's lack of will and imagination and memories and knowledge, it would make sense that a Gerson couldn't form in pure darkness, because it lacks that memory, lacks that will to bring Gerson to life. Then we can talk about Gaster. Gaster was the royal scientist before Alphys in Undertale. He built the core, a massive machine which generates power for the underground. In Undertale, he has no direct connection to the player, unless you count the mystery man disappearing upon being interacted with. He is a mystery, someone in the shadows, hidden so far that most will never see him unless you get the right fun values to get some indirect connection. In contrast, Gaster in Deltarune straight up talks to us. The Goner Maker sequence, as referred to in the code, is him talking to us all the way until the black screen at the end of it. He talks to us if we die. He talks to us if we try to win against the knight and lose. He talks to us at the end of Chapter 4, too. He plays more of a role in Deltarune. Not an active role, he's still pretty passive, only reacting to our losses, but it's way more than he had in Undertale. And not to mention, the actual contents of Entry 17 line up decently well with an idea like this. Entry number 17 reads, Entry number 17. Dark, darker yet darker. The darkness keeps growing. The shadows cutting deeper. Photon readings. Negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? Which lines up well with him rambling to himself about the nature of the machine he's working on before he notices two people walking up to him. And if you'll allow me to speculate, maybe those two are a deer and a human. It's also possible that this would line up with the idea that he has clairvoyance of some kind, and was planning for the two of them to use the machine so that he could test the effects of the darkness on them. The benefits to him we will get to in a second. And while I could tell you why I think a kindly headstrong characterization for Des, even enough to have her press a button that she doesn't know about, makes sense, I think I can just flash some of the information on screen. I hope you forgive me. That is to say, I have no direct evidence for this. It's still all implication. Now, let's go back to what the plot of this theory is. The dark fountain of this machine opens, and because it was opened at a time when it wasn't ready, the darkness is unstable or something, and the souls of Des and Chris begin to break. Chris's soul breaks, Des's doesn't. All of a sudden, a light reveals itself to them, and saves them. This person is going to be a disembodied voice speaking to them, but they're Gaster, if you know the signs. He'll speak like Gaster, they just won't be able to see him, so that the mystery of what he looks like is maintained for the casual audience. Chris and Des have to make a promise to Gaster. Something, Des and Chris have to make the prophecy happen. Des becomes a peon to the prophecy, and Chris must follow her. The Knight and the Cage. Gaster brings Chris back to life on the condition that they have to both do the prophecy as their newly assigned roles, using the connection of the game and Chris to make their new soul by some means. I haven't watched Device Theory in a while, okay? I don't remember what Molly Star says. Whatever. This is gonna be Chris's new soul. This incident gives Gaster a few things at the cost of Chris and Des's real lives. It gives him peons who he has control over, and it gives him insight into what unstable darkness can do to people. So then the rest of the past happens, and Oh, ignore this huge thing flying by. I'm sure I wasn't going to use that in a video that would have been over an hour long. The start of Deltarune takes place when the Castletown Dark Fountain is made. At midnight, when Des brings the machine over from the shelter to the school closet, the Rousey object, which has personal ties to her because he knows that Gerson is a loved one for some reason, already in the closet collecting dust. She will press a button for pure darkness. Then she's going to walk out of the school closet, close the doors, and create the other dark fountain in the forgotten classroom next door before leaving. And thus, the Castletown Dark Fountain's pure darkness is a machine. Yes, this theory is the one that I favor because it's like somewhat thought about. There are ways to portray the story posited in this theory. I'll leave it at that because I am scared of the inevitable counter-evidence. Now for the other theory. This theory will have nothing to do with the past. It only matters to the current Castletown Dark Fountain. This theory is going to be pretty uncritical of the game, so it's not going to be very detailed, and it's certainly not going to get into the most important parts of the game. It's just going to be about what might be true in a way that is probably super lame. This theory assumes that Des and Chris have become the Knight and Cage respectively already. The Roaring Knight and Chris are in contact and making their plans already. There's an incident that happened, but it's not the same machine incident that happened like before. Or maybe it did, but I don't really stand by that. At the start of the game, the Roaring Knight puts the Rousey object into the closet and opens a pure dark fountain by herself, without trying at all. Then, she uses a little more effort, a little oomph, to make the classroom dark fountain. Yes, I am positing in this theory that pure darkness is a product of some kind of lack of empathy. That you can make pure darkness by just not caring that much about what darkness you intend to bring to life. Because, as a reminder, pure darkness and normal darkness are different because of a simple fact. All objects can live in one, not all can live in the other. And thus you could interpret this will being the most important thing as determination being the most important thing, which has a lot of correlation with empathy and compassion, because both are tied to the soul, one in Undertale and one in Deltarune. First of all, let me point out for you all that this theory would entail an acceptance of fantasy tropes in a game that is regularly subversive in its writing. That is true. The idea itself isn't too interesting on its own. In isolation, it's kind of a boring idea, actually. But, second of all, the game isn't uninterested in normal fantasy tropes. Presentation of ideas is key, and we see that all over Deltarune. The world where Toby is a tricky guy who writes without any regard for logic and only for what can be the most ridiculous twist and turn event possible is not this world. He writes in a way that follows logic, even if he does make twists sometimes. He uses storytelling tropes. Deltarune mentions titans being described as some kind of horrible, irredeemable, but very much living beasts, forces of nature, that would aptly be described as pure evil. And while I could imagine that he is hiding the truth from us, the way that he says it, the urgency in his voice, the steel in his eyes, and his sprite, that reads as honest. Lying could get the fun gang killed, and making up convincing lies under this mountain of pressure isn't easy. The Titans work that way, period. That's a very tropey, fantasy-esque idea. And guess what? It's not bad just because the game is written that way. If you just look at what happened and don't appreciate the added ideas that make this goofy idea palatable, the effects that it has on the characters, the way that it advances the plot, and how it gives us insight into the Knight's character, you'll miss out on a lot of what makes this entire game good. The very idea of dark fountains is fantasy-esque anyways. We can't count out a simple idea like effort being the solution to what makes pure darkness, no matter how lame I'm making it sound with this theory. I would also say that for this theory to be anywhere near true, the third sanctuary would have to be pure darkness, just because the game never outright said that it wasn't, because there aren't any stone darkness there, as far as I know. I don't want to know if I'm wrong. Please don't tell me in the comments about potential evidence to the contrary. That would make me far too confident in my other theory that I thought about far more. Please, please don't do that. I should go to sleep. Anyway, that is the unceremonious end of this video. I know it's not a great end to this video, but I don't have great ideas all the time. Lord knows that 1 hour video wasn't going to be good. God, it's embarrassing. I didn't even know Gerson was stated to be a Dark Knight until I reread the text about him from Rousey for this video. Oh, fine. Would also like to add, I put a lot of time and effort into this video. Leave a comment, Like, maybe subscribe if you want to.